So, after round one, the score is Job 1, Satan 0. But the devil isn't finished yet. Let's move in to chapter 2 and the first 10 verses. On another day, the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them to present himself before him. Satan is reporting from earth. When God speaks well of Job, he says, well, of course he lives right. It's worth his while, isn't it? I mean, he's got so many good things happening in his life, hasn't he? But he'll curse you if he personally suffers. And God gives Satan permission with limits. He must not take Job's life. Other things, yes, but not his life. His wife is understandably, desperately upset. And then in chapter 3, Job's 3 friends come to console, and they end up tormenting him. Notice some of Job's words of agony. He thinks he would be better off dead than facing all this. And from verse 11, he was saying, I wish I'd never been born in the first place. And from verse 20, he suggests that for him, death would be preferable. Why is light given to those in misery and life to the bitter of soul, to those who long for death that does not come? And he goes on to say, I have no peace, no quietness, I have no rest, but only turmoil. Maybe we have never expressed it exactly like Job, but at some time we've all felt this way. We know what we should do when trouble hits, but we don't want to do it. You know, it really helps to keep in mind 3 especially important lessons. Lesson 1, Satan is persistent in his attack. Even though Job survived round 1, the devil wasn't through yet. He gains God's permission, couldn't do it without him, but he gains God's permission for round 2. He is still attacking God's servants today, and it helps to know his methods. He may attack our health. Satan afflicted Job with painful sores. Later, Job describes it. My body is clothed with worms and scabs. My skin is broken and festering. An infirmity may be simultaneously from Satan and God. Remember how Paul had a thorn in the flesh? He prayed for it to go, and he got an answer to his prayer. You see, it's one thing to pray and get no answer. It's another to pray and get the answer no. This thorn was a messenger from Satan to torment him. But do you see this? It was equally from God. Paul had been given so many special revelations from God that he needed something to keep him humble and of further use to God. He came to realize that. It was simultaneously from Satan, but allowed by God. Satan wanted to destroy him through it. God wanted to build him through it. And when Peter was telling Cornelius about Jesus, he spoke of him healing those who were afflicted by the devil. Look, Satan wants to make us miserable. And one way is by attacking our health. And he may attack our marriage. Job lost his fortune, family and fitness, but his wife survived. Satan is crafty, and he will use someone close to us to get at us. Satan's allegation is that Job will curse God, and that's exactly what Mrs. Job suggested he did. He was using her tongue. The tongue can be set on fire, as from hell. James tells us that in the New Testament. Seems to be happening here. Before getting critical, remember, Mrs. Job was suffering greatly as well. She has lost all her children and is watching her husband going through excruciating suffering. And we are wired in such a way that we would prefer to hurt instead of watching a loved one hurt. So, let's learn from this. Satan wants to drive a wedge between every husband and wife. And when you go through a trial, it can lead to a marriage breakdown. What did Job say to his wife? You are talking like a foolish woman. Now, notice he didn't call his wife a fool. He said she was like a fool. And Job's wife stayed with him and eventually enjoyed the blessings of fortune and family. But watch out for this. Don't let Satan attack us through those who love us. And a second lesson to grasp is that faithful servants struggle. Even godly people may sometimes feel like quitting. In the next 30 chapters, Job gets awfully close to blasphemy. Is Job suicidal? No. He was just expressing the depth of his pain and his longing for the next world. You know, sometimes when we are full of self-pity, we can say the wildest things. In our better moments, we know we don't mean it. You know, we have some strange ideas about the victorious Christian life. We picture someone like, well, let's call him the Reverend Rock Firm. He's taking the ladies' bright owl meeting, and suddenly a text message comes. A glint comes into his eyes. Excuse me, ladies, he says. Duty calls. And the ladies smile benignly at their minister. They are used to their absent-minded pastor. Moving into his office, suddenly he takes on a resolute look, and then he goes through the church door in his red cape on another mission to save the world. And watching people ask, is it a bird? Is it a plane? No, they say. It's super Christian. And mild-mannered Mark Time looks on, sighs and says, oh, super Christian, I wish I could be like you. That's how we view the victorious Christian, isn't it? At least many of us do. But it's not how the Bible pictures it. The Apostle Paul was a victorious Christian but spent most of his life struggling. The victorious Christian life is not becoming a Mr. and Mrs. over the circumstances, but like Paul, able to say in all these things, not outside of them, but in them, we are more than conquerors. So, stay faithful in our struggles. And lesson 3, maintain integrity in suffering. Job's wife says, are you still holding on to your integrity? Curse God and die. Even though we may go through deep distress, we can maintain our integrity. The word integrity, I think it's lost its meaning in this dog-eat-dog world. What is integrity? It comes from the math world for a whole number. If we disintegrate, we lose our wholeness. And when we suffer, there are 2 things which help maintain our integrity. One is trust God's plan when we can't see his hand. At the very time Job felt God had forsaken him, he was in fact watching him and every move with microscopic attention. In a sense, God was putting his entire reputation on how Job would react. And like us, Job couldn't understand the details of God's plan. But he could trust his hand. And eventually Job will say right at the end of the book, I know that you can do all things. No plan of yours can be thwarted. Sometimes we simply must believe God, even when the evidence is against it, because it's not real evidence, not real truth. We may be amid suffering, and we can't see any evidence for believing God will help us through this. Trust God's plan when you can't see his hand. And trust God's grace when we can't see his face. We are hurting, and we beg God to change our circumstances. That's okay. If we are looking at our bad circumstances, our eyes are looking at the wrong thing, however. We should be looking to see what God is doing. Even though we may not see his face, we can trust his grace. William Cooper suffered from depression and was suicidal. In fact, he attempted it several times and was rescued just in time. He tried hanging himself, but someone spotted him through a window and came to his aid. He tried drowning, but the cab driver stopped him. Meeting hymn writer and minister Isaac Newton, he discovered amazing grace. And later he wrote this hymn. God moves in a mysterious way, his wonders to perform. He plants his footsteps in the sea and rides upon the storm. And this is my favourite verse. Judge not the Lord by feeble sense, trying to figure it out, but trust him for his grace. Behind a frowning providence, the storms and the disasters, he hides a smiling face. Job suffered terribly, but he never gave up on God. He asked questions and he wanted to die, but he never gave up. And he never sinned against God by blaming him. He didn't curse God and die. He maintained his integrity right to the end. Yes, Job's eyes stayed filled with tears. But he didn't use tears as a microscope to focus on his suffering. He used his tears as a telescope as he looked forward 2,000 years to one who would come as a great Redeemer. Someone who would stand by him and defend him and take him into a better place. Started to believe for that. My wife Pauline and I visited Poland for some meetings. We visited the concentration camp at Auschwitz. I was glad that we did, but what a depressing place. To think what man will do to another human being. But a young lady named Rachel survived the camp. An American soldier held the door open for her to come out. They got to know one another. Time passed and they fell in love and they were married. And that's what God can do. He can make something beautiful out of something very, very ugly. Our God is an awesome God, and I'm glad he is in control, aren't you? Going through tough times, we can either look for the junk or for the joy. And in the end, God rewarded Job's persistence and patience. This is a favourite poem of mine. Did you tackle that trouble that came your way with a resolute heart and cheerful, or hide your face from the light of day with a craven soul and fearful? Oh, trouble's a ton, or trouble's an ounce, or trouble is what you make it. It isn't the fact that you're hurt that counts, but only how did you take it. You were beaten to earth. Well, what's that? Come up with a smiling face. It's nothing against you to fall down flat, but to lie there, that's a disgrace. The harder you're thrown, why, the higher you bounce. Be proud of your blackened eye. It isn't the fact that you're licked that counts. It's how did you fight and why. And though you be done to death, what then? If you battled the best you could, if you played your part in the world of men, why, the Lord will call it good. Death comes by a crawl or comes with a pounce, and whether he's slow or spry, it isn't the fact you're dead that counts, but only how did you die. If the Lord delays his return, we're all going to face death. We will be better off dead. It will mean heaven for us. What a future.